Friends in the Corner podcast. Stories and topics from around the state of Kentucky. Welcome to Friends in the Corner podcast. Stories and topics from around the state of Kentucky. I'm your host, Dan Polly, coming to you from beautiful Lexington, Kentucky, as we are starting to come into the tail end of August of 2020. Man, 2020 has just felt like the longest year possible. We're still trying to navigate these waters of the coronavirus as we've been in here for, I guess, almost 4 months now, since March, longer than that. But we're still trying to figure out day by day where things are going with this virus and trying to see where things might go. We've got a few sports that are back open, which makes it a little more digestible, I guess to say. And hopefully before long here, we'll have football on our schedules here also. Still some uncertainty there. I know that there's some schedules posted, especially for UK. But hey, as we've learned with this virus, anything can change within a week. And so we'll keep you posted if we're going to be having a UK football season coming up here, and we'll have some content out if we do and discuss more on those topics. But today we've got some great content for you guys, as we're going to be doing a tribute episode to someone that was a huge inspiration in my life, Dr. Mike Farrell. Dr. Farrell is a legendary Kentucky journalist, a Kentucky Journalism Hall of Famer, an award-winning college professor at the University of Kentucky, who I actually had the honor of learning under during my time at the University of Kentucky. And it's unfortunate that this week that we're publishing the episode, we're coming up to the 1-year anniversary of his passing, unfortunately. Dr. Farrell died last year on August 28th of 2019 to some illnesses. And last year when I found out about his passing, I did this little 10-minute tribute episode to Dr. Farrell just to talk about what his mentorship meant to me, and it was a very off-the-hip type of episode if you want to go back into the archives and listen to it. But as we started to come up to the 1-year anniversary, I knew that I wanted to still do something special to remember Mike in a way that I feel like he should be honored. And so we're actually going to be talking today with Mike's son, Dave Farrell. Dave is coming to us from my hometown of Dayton, Ohio, and we're just going to share some stories of Dr. Farrell and just the legacy he left. We're going to talk about his time as a journalist at the Kentucky Post, some of the stories that he covered. We're going to talk about the impact that he had on so many students during his time at the University of Kentucky. We're going to talk a little bit about his fandom for the Cincinnati Reds even. And we're just going to remember him in just such an amazing way. And Dave just shares some awesome stories on this episode of the podcast that I'm excited to share with you guys. So really excited to have Dave on to talk about the legacy of his father, Dr. Mike Farrell. And we're excited to bring this episode to you guys here today. Before we jump into the episode, I do want to let you guys know that Friends in the Corner podcast is supported by listeners like you. So if you guys want to help support the show, check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/FITC podcast. That's patreon.com/FITC podcast, where you can learn about the different tiers you can help support us at to help the show grow. You can join the likes of Tyler Witt, Trevina Woods, Cindy Klinkebeard, and Mama Polly herself, who are helping to support the show on a monthly basis at those different tiers to continue the growth of the show so we can afford better equipment, get the audio out there to as many ears as possible, and continue the legacy of Friends in the Corner podcast moving forward. So check us out at patreon.com/FITC podcast and find us on social media at FITC podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram as well. Okay, so the bills are paid, and now it's time to get into the episode. Remembering Dr. Mike Farrell, here's his son, Dave Farrell. Here we go. This is a very interesting circumstance for me to be in right now with my upcoming guest on this show, Dave Farrell, because I am a man from Dayton, Ohio, now a transplant in Kentucky. And now I'm talking to Dave, who's a native from Kentucky, who's a transplant into Dayton. So I don't know. It feels full circle for me, Dave, to start talking to someone from my hometown.
Sounds good. Yep. Both are great places.
Yeah. Well, hey, if we ever get the chance to meet in person, you got to bring me some Bill's Donuts sometime.
That is our family's favorite. Yeah, I will definitely.
Absolutely. Well, Dave, I'm excited to have you onto this show because it's a little something special for me, and I'm sure you too, as we're getting ready to talk about someone who's, I know for me, during my college years was a huge influence to me, and that was Dr. Mike Farrell. He was a journalism professor at the University of Kentucky that I got to study under when I was there. And if you've anyone's ever had the opportunity to meet him, they'll tell you how special he was. And unfortunately, around this time last year, he passed away. And since then, I did a little bit of a tribute episode on my podcast last year to talk about what he meant to me. And I just wanted to do something kind of leading up to the 1-year anniversary to honor him too. And Dave is his son. And Dave, it's just awesome to have you on here to talk about the legacy of your dad.
Well, I appreciate it, Dan. It means a lot to us and something special for us and our grandkids to have another memorial to him.
Yeah. Well, and Dave, we're going to be talking a lot about your dad here on this show. But before we do that, can you tell my listeners a little bit about who you are and where you're from?
Sure. So I was actually born in Detroit, Michigan, which is where right by where my parents met. And we lived there I was about 4 when we moved back to Northern Kentucky for my dad. So I grew up there, and I graduated from Holmes High School, which is where he graduated from. And then life has taken me to Dayton, Ohio. I am a civilian at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and overseeing a software development program that we're doing on base for logistics and wargaming. And I have 4 sons, and 2 of which are in college now. So I used to joke with Dad that he was old when I went to college, and now I feel that way. Just fortunate with where we live. We live about 15 minutes north of where you grew up in Centerville. We live near Beaver Creek, Ohio, and great place to raise our boys. And the nice thing, it was about an hour from Northern Kentucky, so we were always able to see family quickly and get the grandkids down to see Mike and my mom frequently.
Yeah. Well, I know there was something when I was in class with Dr. Farrell. He would always tell us whenever we were getting close to weekend when he was going to see you guys, he always say, whatever you do, don't email me this weekend. I'm spoiling my grandkids every time. Yep. I remember walking out of his office. He's like, and I was like, all right, I'll email you this weekend. He's like, don't do that. Wait till Monday. I'm with the grandkids.
And you know, what's funny is, when I was growing up, I never felt quote unquote spoiled by him. And then we have these boys and his grandkids, and I'm like, man, you're so much nicer to them than you were to me, and you buy him so much stuff. But yeah, he loved spending time. We met him a lot, or brought the boys down to him to go to Reds games. So it's a pretty special thing to see the joy in your parents when they're with their grandkids, your kids, and see them in that different light.
Yeah. My brother, he just had a baby boy. And so to watch my parents kind of, I guess in a way, spoil him has been kind of fascinating. Like you were saying, I look at the love they're giving Owen. I'm like, where was that when we were younger? It's like, it skips a generation, I guess. I don't know. So.
It does. It was funny. It hit me. I don't know. My oldest was about 3, and he broke a lamp at their house. And Dad was just like totally cool with it and helped him clean up. And I was like, bro, you'd have grounded me for like 6 months. And he's like, yeah, but you're taking that kid home with you, and he's my grandson. So yeah, it definitely changes parents when they have grandkids.
Well, he was definitely an awesome grandparent from what I've heard, and definitely left a very unique legacy, especially around the Northern Kentucky area that you said you guys grew up in. So for a lot of my listeners who are probably going to be listening to the show, I'm sure there's going to be a few that know Dr. Farrell or maybe some of his students. But for those who didn't know him, could you kind of give us a little snapshot of who Dr. Farrell was up in the Northern Kentucky area as a teacher and all that?
Sure. So yeah, he was born in Northern Kentucky. Um, his dad was a Cincinnati Bell employee. I have wonderful memories of my grandfather,
Mm.
and his dad was a tank driver in World War II. He
Wow.
was actually in D-Day. There were He was on a naval transport, and there were three tanks in front of him, and the first two tanks got off the boat and didn't make it. And my grandfather was the third tank off and made it all the way up the beaches that day. And actually, he fought in the war till the Battle of the Bulge, and his tank was destroyed there by the Nazis.
Mm.
And he was sent home. He nearly lost both of his legs. So he was just a hero. And I remember as a kid, my grandfather he still had shrapnel in his body from that. So it was, one of my dad's biggest things he instilled in me is a love for this country and an understanding for what our vets have done to give us the democracy we have. And his dad was the living embodiment of it. But also, like the greatest generation, didn't like to talk about it. So, but he grew up there. He went off to Moody Bible Institute and started off as a clergy member. He went to Northville, Michigan, where he was a youth pastor, which is where he met my mom.
Mm.
And they got married and had me. And when I was about 3 or 4, his mom was diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease, which is just an awful, awful disease. And so they moved back to Northern Kentucky. Dad had always loved writing. He had always loved journalism. He had spent a couple years at what eventually became NKU. It was called Covington something. And he had a teacher that really influenced him. He had a teacher at Holmes High School that really influenced him. So he wanted to move back to Northern Kentucky and be with his mom and help out as much as he could. And through some connections, he got a job at the Kentucky Post. And so that's where he started his journalism career there.
Interesting. So I was kind of curious to see what got him into journalism. So he didn't study it at Moody. He when he came back home, that's when the influence to start writing and get into that field is when it started to happen for him.
Right. He had always loved writing. He wrote some stuff while he was at that church in Northville, but he had been on the school paper at the college he had been at. He had been on the school paper at Holmes High School, which was called the Homespun, which later my brother and I both got to do. So we got to carry on that tradition. But yeah, that's his journalism media career began when we moved back to Covington so that he could be there with his mom and his dad and help with her care. And then he got that job at the Kentucky Post.
And the Kentucky Post was a newspaper that used to be up in that northern Kentucky area. For some of my listeners who may not know, what was the Kentucky Post all about up that way?
So it was a Scripps Howard paper, and it was tied to the Cincinnati Post. So if you had a Kentucky Post subscription in Northern Kentucky, you also got the Cincinnati Post. It was the afternoon paper. It usually came out 10 or 11 in the afternoon, and it was the competitor to the Cincinnati Enquirer. And at the time, I think it was, for most of his career, it was like the third biggest paper in Kentucky next to, the Herald Leader and the Courier Journal. So it had a section that just covered Northern Kentucky news. And then when there were big national stories, it would cover, the kind of the Northern Kentucky perspective on those stories.
And he was there for about 11 years. It looks like he started off as a reporter and he eventually started moving into editorial roles. Is that right?
Correct. He was a reporter, and then he became city editor, and then he finished there as the managing editor.
And how old were you when he was working at the paper?
So I would have been about 4 when he started, and then it was about when I was 15 or 16 that he left the Post to start expanding into academia. He was getting his doctorate at the same time as he was teaching. So it was about that time where he transitioned, which is something that I didn't get at the time. You don't get a lot of things at the time when you're a kid, but it was very impressive that he decided to make this pretty significant career change later on in life. And he had flourished at the Post, and he got a lot of offers to go to other places to write or be an editor. But he always had a love for teaching and helping students. So he made a complete career change and decided to go after something that, he'd always dreamed of doing and felt like was his, calling to do.
I was gonna say I was kind of doing the math before he got on here because it was like the late '90s when he got started at UK, so he was like in his 40s when he got
Yeah,
ish.
he was almost 50 actually when he started. So yeah, it was later on in life, and he had a lot of security in what he did, but it was just kind of one of those. I don't know. My dad was not really spontaneous, but it was a carpe diem, not spur of the moment, but spontaneous decision. But it was based on something he always wanted to do, and it was impressive to see him, will it to make it happen and then flourish in what he did.
What was it that you think that inspired him to get into teaching? That like, this is something that I wanted to do. Do you have an idea what that might have been?
Well, he had a lot of teachers that influenced him, and one of the things about my dad was he had this amazing ability to keep relationships going. So just for an example, I think it was his sixth grade teacher ended up being my fifth grade teacher at Latonia Elementary, and also taught my brother. And he had stayed connected with her, and she was kind of a family friend our whole life.
Mm.
And teachers, people like that influenced him. He kept around. He was always so good about telling them how much they meant to him, and I think he was influenced by that. And he just had this ability and desire to want to help people. He had been helped by so many people, and had raised two boys, and one of them was pretty difficult, and that was me. But just he really never. He just always saw the value in people, and even when people didn't believe in themselves and didn't know that they could accomplish what they could, that was Dad's forte, in pulling that out of people. And sometimes it involved, tough love, which I got to see a lot of. But that was just something, he loved college students because he had been loved as a college student and encouraged and mentored. And I just think he really wanted to do that, help kids succeed. And obviously he loved journalism and media and teaching about the First Amendment. So it all came together for him, and just really involved a lot of the passions that he had in his life.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I can attest from being one of his students, just what he poured into not just me, but a ton of different students, I think meant the world to me, especially for me. Kind of a background, Dave, to let you know about me and my situation. When I started at journalism school at UK, I had no desire to actually go into journalism. My goal was actually to go to seminary school. I wanted to go to seminary school, go to Asbury. And when I got into the program, I was talking to your dad, and he was asking me, well, what do you want to do with your degree? Because I was not a great journalism student. Because while your dad's one of my favorite people, I don't know if I was quite your dad's favorite person, but 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 I told him my goals, wanting to go to seminary school, wanting to become a pastor, and we had that connection where he was telling me about him being a youth pastor up in Michigan, and we talked a lot about faith and family. It was just something that was really cool just to connect on, and he did kind of help me navigate certain spiritual beliefs and some of my own faith during my time at UK, which I'm very appreciative for. Because like I said, for the journalism students that were wanting to go into journalism, he would help them out a lot. But I appreciate that even though I wasn't wanting to go into that field, he was still helping me kind of bring me along that way too, which was really awesome.
And we've heard so many stories like yours sent about he wanted more people in journalism program, but he spent a lot of time holistically and just wanted to know what was best for a person, make them satisfied in life. What should they be doing? And that was one of the many things we really appreciated about him. And he cared more about the person than saying, oh, all these people are in journalism now. He just wanted to help people find what was best for them. And he was so good at that. So that means so much to us to hear that, because, he cared about each individual and wanting to do what was best for them and helping them however he could.
And I will say, though, I did not get off to the best start with him. So while Dr. Farrell was an incredibly amazing guy when you got to know him, when you first met him, he was pretty stoic. And I made a huge mistake the first day I walked into his class. I wore an Ohio State sweatshirt.
Yeah, that was a mistake. Yeah.
And he, being from Dayton, I'm a little bit of a Buckeye fan. My family went there. And
Right.
So I walked in and he kind of gave me a look because I was sitting right by him. And then the next day he came and he said, if anyone plans on wearing any Ohio State stuff in my class, think again. I will not have that in here. And of course he was talking to me because I was the only one that wore. There was only like 3 kids from our class from Ohio, and I was the only one stupid enough to wear a Ohio State shirt into the course.
Yeah, it was Michigan football growing up and Kentucky basketball. So Ohio State and Duke fans were on the list, but he always tolerated them.
I was going to say, because you're living in the middle of Buckeye country now, so I'm sure there was a little bit of patience you had to learn being out that way.
It's awful, frankly. And I think since we've been here, Ohio State has beat Michigan every year but once.
Oh, go Bucks, man. Well, they're not playing this year, supposedly, so we'll see. But
yeah, so Michigan won't lose this year, yeah.
Yeah, Michigan won't lose this year. They got a freebie at least this year, so.
That's right, yeah.
But yeah, I think one thing that was interesting about your dad, I was just mentioning, what a lot of he was one of those people, like once you got to know him, he was an awesome guy. But if you didn't know him right off the back, you kind of see him as this kind of like more stoic, more reserved person. And I've talked to a lot of people who left the journalism program before they got in there. Like, yeah, Dr. Farrell, he didn't like me at all. He just always gave me these looks and stuff. He's like, and when I got through, I was like, well, that's not true. He probably did like you, but it takes a little bit of time to eventually get into that point with him. But once you did, I mean, he was there for you. He was my advisor, and anytime I had a question, I'd email him. He probably wasn't happy to answer all my questions, but I at least knew I could email him and get a response from him. So,
yeah, he had that aura at first, but yeah, he definitely had a soft heart underneath. But yeah, there was a little bit of that, and a lot of my friends growing up were like, "Man, your dad's so this and this," and then the more they got to know him, it was like, "Oh yeah, he's pretty relaxed," and he'd give you the shirt off his back, but there was definitely a little bit of a intimidation when you first met him, and he was in a leadership role in some place. He could come across as a little more gruff than he was deep down, but when people got to know him, they saw a different side of him.
Absolutely. Well, I was going to ask you also, because before he started teaching, we were talking about how he was at the Kentucky Post, and you were there while you were growing up during some of his, most important times being there. Do you remember any stories that he helped to cover while he was up there? Anything that kind of stood out to you?
So a couple of them really stood out. One of them was it was late 80s, and it was the Carrollton Bus Crash. And it was a church group that had gone to Kings Island in Mason, which I know you're familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
And they were on their way home to a church in Carrollton, and a drunk driver hit them. And it was, at the time, it was the biggest not biggest. It was the most victims in a drunk driving crash, I think, ever. There were over 24 students and adult chaperones who passed away, and about 40 others that were hurt. I don't remember the numbers exactly, but out of it came a multitude of safety issues, and really, it was actually the lady who was the local chapter lead for Mothers Against Drunk Driving. She eventually became the national president after that. And it was a huge story for Northern Kentucky. At first, obviously, the shock and terrible nature of all these kids who lost their life. They were trapped in the bus. It was horrific. But out of it came some real reforms. And I know Dad was, gone a lot, covering it, leading reporters. There was also a plane crash, an Air Canada crash at CVG, the Cincinnati airport, which is in Northern Kentucky. And it had come from Dallas. And I remember him leaving in the middle of the night for that. He covered a lot of the national stories. I remember Reagan's attempted assassination, Challenger, things like that. And he spent a lot of time getting local news coverage. One of my teachers at Holmes High School was actually one of the later round finalists for that role that Kristen McCullough took. So I remember them spending time with that. So there were a lot of stories like that. But if it's all right, I want to tell you the probably the coolest story he covered while he was at the Post that had the most meaning to us personally. It was Dad was the managing editor at that time, and my dad, something I mentioned in one of the posts, my dad's name, he's Mike Farrell, but his name is James Michael. And James he's named for his uncle, who was a World War II pilot who crashed and perished in 1942. And his body was never returned. He was lost in the Atlantic. But while Dad was at the Post, and I was 13, 14 at the time, so this is mid 80s, he had a feature writer. And his feature writer went into his office one day and he said, "Hey, I just got this call from this woman in Texas, and her mom had just passed, and she was going through her diary, and she found out that the man who raised her as her dad, which she always assumed was her biological father, turned out not to be her biological father. And he was a great, great dad to her. But very, very long story short, this feature writer was telling my dad, she goes, yeah, she's calling Northern Kentucky because her biological father turned out to be a young man named James Wendell Souter, and he perished in June of 42. And my dad said, yeah, that's my uncle. And so we were able to meet this woman who was our cousin. She was the daughter of Uncle Buddy. We called him Uncle Buddy, but he was my dad's namesake. His name was James. And it was just a phenomenal story because Dad had taught us all about Uncle Buddy and the sacrifice he made. And we kept in touch with her. So it was one of the coolest stories. And it was, Dad reconnecting with his namesake, who we had no idea, had family out there that we were unaware of. So she gave us some old letters from Uncle Buddy, and we don't even know if Buddy realized that this woman he was planning to marry was having his child. But it was a really special time, and Dad and I talked a lot about that story and how cool it was that he was at the Post when that all happened, and we got to meet the daughter of his namesake out of it.
That is actually a really cool story. It's like a small world situation. That's actually...
It is. It's a one in a million thing, but it's really a special family story of ours, and all was possible because he was working at the Post, and this feature writer brought it to him.
I may be remembering this wrong, but I vaguely recall maybe this coming up in my class. But did he interview Pete Rose at his house in Cincinnati?
Yes, he did. He actually interviewed him twice at his house. So yeah, he did a couple interviews with Pete, and he's shown me a story. He said they both were interested, so we'll put it that way. But Reds were a huge part of our lives. Dad and I and my brother were there when Rose broke the record, and we were at a lot of Pete Rose games and met him a few times at spring training and other events. But yeah, Dad interviewed him twice at his house.
Wow, that's crazy. I remember because I don't know if you know this. I was at his funeral last year, and so I got to hear you speak a lot about him. And you were telling some stories that I thought were kind of funny. That when he would go to games, he would wear like the big wire headphones and stuff like that.
I was so embarrassed. Yeah, he wore the tube socks up to his knees, and And we always had to listen to Marty and Joe. So he got these quote unquote modern headphones, and oh man, it looked like one of those tin foil hat guys who were listening for aliens or something like that. But yeah, he loved going to games. He loved hearing Marty and Joe while we were at the game. So we didn't think it was cool at the time, but looking back, those were some very special memories.
Well, I was hoping with this new restart to the MLB, the Reds might be able to honor him with a few wins, but it's not looking too hot. I had a
Not
little
looking
bit
great.
not looking, and they're not even playing now. So yeah,
Right.
so you can live and dream,
Right.
I guess. So
Yep.
the post he left the Post before the Post shut down. We kind of discussed about, and then he went on to teach at UK and get his doctorate there. So what was that? And one of the things I thought that was kind of interesting to me was he was still living up in Cincinnati, and he'd commute down, and he would come down with another teacher from or professor from time to time. And I was like, man, that's a commute I don't want to make anytime soon. But
Yeah.
you kind of talked about late on in his career, he kind of made this transition. And we've discussed it a little bit here, but what were you guys' thoughts when he kind of told you guys like, hey, I'm wanting to make this transition from journalism to education?
Um, he always had things under control. So when you're 15, 16, you're like, okay, dad's got this, it's fine. It was as I got older and looked back, I thought, wow, that was a huge leap. That was a leap of faith, and he did it. And it was something later on in life we talked about. I was like, wow, you nailed it. That was very impressive. And the house I grew up in, he loved that house. He loved Northern Kentucky. He loved the church that was just a few blocks from their house. And so I always was like, hey, you ought to move halfway, or go to Florence or Dry Ridge or something. But he wanted to stay in that house. He wanted to be part of Covington and Latonia. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, like you said, he commuted a lot. I know a lot of students, came up and saw him and went to Reds game with him, stuff like that. So he wanted, he loved UK and he loved being down there, but he also wanted to stay in Northern Kentucky. So he did a lot of commuting, and but he didn't want it any other way. So it didn't matter what we recommended or any advice we had for him. This is what he wanted, and he got to do it right up until the very end. So he was very happy, doing both things.
And while he was there, he definitely made quite the impact on the journalism program out there. Won awards for out teacher and national outstanding faculty advisor, which I can say he was a great advisor. In 2015 there, he taught media law and ethics courses, Kentucky Journalism Hall of Fame. I mean, I've got them all listed out here, but it's too long for me to read on the show. But
Right.
he really did. He really was, I think, out of all the professors I had at UK, he was definitely one of the most interesting to listen to. And I even think about this today because I'm not a journalist, even though I run a podcast. But even the courses that I took with him, those ethics and media law courses, they've played such an impact on my even current life. And I think about the First Amendment, I think about journalism ethics with everything that's gone on in the world the last year. I mean, a lot of what I learned from Dr. Farrell, I kind of see them, how they've kind of crafted my beliefs and kind of my thoughts in the world too. And I'm very appreciative for that because he taught beyond just journalism, I felt, but he taught like just for people how to be decent human beings in a way.
And I think one of the things, and I mean, that's always the best teachers, right? They they give you instruction, but they help you make decisions for yourself and learn to think for yourself. And I know that was something big for Dad. He wanted students to understand the importance of the First Amendment. He wanted them to understand the importance of a free press. He wanted them to understand ethics, whether it was in journalism and media or just in life. But I know his goal was always to, give students a foundation, and hopefully later on in life, wherever life took them, maybe something, one or two things he learned would help shape their thinking, or at least be an influence in their life as they make decisions on their worldview and do with their careers in life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know the last time I saw him was actually my graduation day. I graduated from UK in 2014. Walked off the stage, and last person whose hand I shook was Dr. Farrell's, and then that's when I was done with UK. And then I didn't do a good job of keeping up with him over the years, but I heard a few years ago that he wasn't doing very well. So if it's too sort of a subject, I'm sorry, I was curious about. But what kind of happened, kind of between what led to his passing, I guess to say.
So Dad's liver failed. I mean, Dad never drank a drop of alcohol in his life, and it was just a genetic thing.
Mm.
And we were working to get him on the transplant list, so that he could get a new liver, or maybe even you can do partial transplants where a good donor can give you part of their liver. And it was just a series of unfortunate events. He had a couple setbacks, and you know, fell and needed some surgery because of that. And they did one procedure to try to mitigate some of the side effects of the liver failure, and it didn't work. And so we got to a point where he wasn't going to be healthy enough for a transplant. So it felt very unfair. It was tough, because a transplant would have been kind of like a reset button, and most of his health issues would have gone away. But that's how it played out, and we were very fortunate to have the time with him that we did. And but it was kind of unexpected, and we thought many times we were going to be able to turn a corner and have a lot more time with him, but it didn't work out that way.
I was reading a few articles, kind of getting ready for this this discussion with you today, and there was a few professors from the journalism school who were quoted saying that he felt like he was going to make a comeback and get back to work at some point.
Yeah, he was he was insistent and fought me a lot, actually. But and part of part of the there was a little bit of confusion involved near the end. And so it was just and it was his stubbornness, which I loved. He just felt like, hey, I'll be fine in the fall, and I'm going to go teach, and wanted to teach so badly because he loved it. He loved it so much. And so he just his mind was still strong enough to say, I want to do the things I love. I want to go see my grandkids. I want to spend time with my wife and my sister and sister-in-law and all this huge network of family he had. So yeah, he was determined he was going to get back. And there's something special about somebody who finishes strong, and it was neat, even though we knew he probably wasn't going to be able to do it, to hear him so insistent that this life's work that he did, he wanted to keep doing it because he loved it. He didn't have one of those jobs that he dreaded, or was just doing it to support the family. He absolutely loved being a professor, and he absolutely loved advising kids and being around students. And so it was really special to see him. He'd always been that way, but even at the end, it was an element of hope and joy that carried him through his last few months, and it meant a lot to us.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think after his passing, there was what you were just saying, the kind of influence and impact he had that came in full action with all the tributes that came out online in the papers. I know we follow each other on Twitter. I saw you retweeting almost everybody who said a kind word to him, and it was amazing to see. Even UK, they honored him on the first season of the football game in the press box with an honorary seat. So for you and your family, what did that mean to just see this overwhelming amount of tributes that came out to him at that time?
So there's two parts of it. The first part is it's a little weird at first, just to be totally honest with you, because sorry, here's this man I grew up with, and who, he wasn't cool growing up. I was grounded a lot, and I saw every side of him, and then to see these younger people or people that were influenced when he was younger saying all these things about it, I was like, man, it's like a different guy. But there's a little bit of that, and then 99% of it is, you're just so proud. And and it's really special for me as a dad because I was like my boys are. You take family for granted, blah blah blah, and they took grandpa for granted, and they're good boys. They're great boys. But sometimes like, it's grandpa, and I don't know if I want to go to Olive Garden. I'd rather play my games.
Mhm.
And it was really neat to be able to show them all that and say, you know what, your grandpa was a huge deal, and um, and and ultimately he loved you. You were the apple of his eye. And so it was really neat for all of us to see that. And just frankly, Dan, one of the biggest privileges I've had with my boys is being able to coach them in different sports. And I'm not a good coach in terms of X's and O's and things like that. But I always loved it because you got to just spend time with kids. You got to try to encourage them and just tell them, you believe in them and things like that. And that was all from my dad. One of the things I learned early on, when you're coaching, I've had all boys, so I've only coached boys, but you see kids who the father-son relationship is so important for any boy, right? And true for girls, right? But I can't, I've always been a son, and I've only had sons. And it's heartbreaking sometimes to see a kid whose dad doesn't show up to play baseball, to his baseball games, or I've had kids before, like, oh, my dad promised I'd be here, my dad would, and he doesn't show up, and it just breaks your heart, right?
Right.
And it's something that's such an honor. Like, I'm so lucky, blessed to have had a dad that was always there, and not only for me and my brother, but for so many other people. And for me to be able to show my boys, like, hey, look at this, your grandfather he was one of a kind. And I was, and man, I was I defied him growing up, and I had no idea how good I had it, right? But he always cared, and never gave up on me. And so to see all those tributes, it was just a reminder of how fortunate we were to have this great man in our life. And at the time I was really struggling with how unfair it was that I was losing him early, even though people lose parents and loved ones so much earlier than this. But,
Mhm.
I was really struggling with that. But it was just a reminder that, yeah, maybe medically we could have prevented this, or we could have gotten some better breaks. But in the time we had him, we had someone who was so exceptional, and we were just very fortunate for the time we had. And 100 years of other people's parents may not equate to how great I had in the time I had my dad.
I know a few years ago, before Dr. Farrell passed away, I had a different mentor who died, and I kind of similar to him. I did this big tribute, and I was like, man, this is what this guy meant to me. And then I went to his funeral, and the entire church was packed with people, and everyone kind of said, wow, I guess everyone else had the same story. We just didn't know it. And that's how I kind of feel about Dr. Farrell is, so he, just from the small things he did, he impacted so many people. And it's just awesome to see that his legacy lives on even like a year later after his passing, and just what he's meant to you, obviously you and your family and stuff like that. But yeah, he was a very special guy, and I was honored. I got to spend the little time I had with him when I was at UK, and yeah. What I wanted to ask you, Dave, I know it's been a little almost a year now, but of all of his achievements that he had in his life, and we just talked about the list we couldn't read because it was so long, what do you think he was the most proud of before he died?
Well, I think he I know the National Faculty Advisor Award was very, I mean, just so significant to him because, and I still have the notebook, of all the fact that it was student driven and students took the time to write about him. That award meant the world to him. But we had 3-4 months with him, and I think what he was most proud of is the relationships he had. The people who came to visit him that were, members of our quote unquote family, whether it was from church or from the Kentucky Post or the Northern Kentucky Tribune. professors and students from UK, just all walks of life. It meant so much to him, all the people that he loved and loved him. And I think ultimately, he, sorry,
It's okay.
I think he wanted to be remembered as a great husband, which he was, and a great dad, which he was. And he was a great brother. His brother passed when, I don't know, probably 20 years ago, but dad loved his brother Bobby and loved his sister and sister-in-law and brother-in-law. And I think ultimately he wanted to be remembered as, he loved sacrificially and he loved graciously, not only the people in his family, but the people he's around. But, as you get to spend time with someone as they're, in their final journey, you see their priorities and you see what lights them up, and it was, what lit him up was the people who came to visit him that loved him and that he loved. And I think that's what he'd most want to be remembered for, is the vast network of people that he loved and who cared about him and how much it meant to him.
Well, Dave, I always want to say thank you so much for coming on here and sharing a little bit about your dad and just what he meant to you and your family and what he meant to so many people. And, like I've kind of said on here a few times, like he was definitely someone who was a huge influence on me. And I'm very appreciative for the time I got to have with him. And even before like you came on here, I was mentioning your dad would talk about you all the time because of the Dayton connection. We would talk about you a lot and your family. And it's really nice to meet you and to talk to you a little bit about him. And I miss him a lot, and I can see a lot of the influence he's had on you and all these people. And sorry, I'm just jamming at this point, but yeah, it was an honor to be underneath his learning tree, is what I want to say.
Well, I really appreciate that. It means a lot to us, Dan. I mean, it's a very special gift to be proud of your dad. And it's a very special gift for him to be remembered in so many ways. And you doing this contributes to that. And we're just, we're honored to be part of his life and the legacy he left. And I know he would just hope that, the people he influenced would maybe just share a little bit of what he did, care about others, be a mentor, influence somebody's life, defend the First Amendment. He loved the First Amendment and love the people in your life like he tried his best to love others. And I know, ultimately that's the greatest honor for him. And we're just, I'm just so privileged to be part of his legacy and to have been raised and loved by someone like this.
Well, Dave, if anyone wants to follow you, or if any maybe for students want to chit chat with you, what's the best way to get a hold of you on social media?
Yeah, I'm let's see, I think I'm Dave M. Farrell on Twitter, or I'm on Facebook, or you've got my email. If they want to contact you, you feel free to share their email with us. So yeah, we'd love that.
Awesome. Well, Dave, I just want to say again, thank you so much for coming on and sharing this. And I know he wasn't a drinker. I'm sorry. I'm going to lift up a little bourbon to him, and I just want to say a toast to Dr. Farrell and the legacy he left, and may we all be better people for it.
That's right. Cheers to that, my friend.
All right, and that is it for our interview with Dave Farrell, remembering his father, Dr. Mike Farrell. I want to thank Dave for coming on and sharing some just amazing stories about the legacy of one of the best human beings I've ever met in my entire life. If you want to keep up to date with what's going on in Dave's life and his family, follow him on Twitter at Dave M. Farrell. And while you're there, go ahead and follow us on Twitter as well. We're on Twitter at FITC Podcast. We're on Instagram and Facebook also at FITC Podcast. If you want to support the show financially, be sure to check us out at patreon.com/FITC Podcast. And if you got ideas for the show, feel free to email us at friendsinthecorner@gmail.com. That's friendsinthecorner, all together lowercase, at gmail.com. Well, guys, this has been a very amazing episode to do. I've had so much fun talking to Dave and had a really great time remembering what Dr. Mike Farrell meant to me and what he meant to his family as well. And we just want to say, Dr. Farrell, thank you for all you did during your life. May you rest easy now. And for the rest of you, may you stay happy, stay healthy, and stay blessed. And we'll see you on the next episode of Friends in the Corner podcast. That's a wrap.